Hello again, everyone. Varel here, Flow Roofing out of Portland, Oregon. And if you're clicking on this video, then you have some interest in ventilation detail. And that's really all we're going to be covering here in the next 10 or so minutes. So, wanted to give you a little introduction on how we approach things. Going to pull back the curtain on our approach a little bit and help everyone understand whether you're a property owner, a GC, or even a roof installer the proper approach to how ventilation in attic spaces should be done. So, who am I again, though? Varel. I started Flow Roofing. I've been in thousands of attics. We've done thousands of projects at this point. The approach in Portland gives us the opportunity to be very specific with how we apply our ventilation details because the spectrum of different home architectural styles you'll see is so broad. And with that, you have to step up time and again to make sure that these systems are actually functional and not just looking sexy. So thank you again. We're going to go ahead and dive right in. All righty. So again, thank you for your time and attention on this. If you are considering anything around attic ventilation, then you have the distinct honor of being one of the more detailed minds of the universe, specifically around a type of project that would generally go overlooked. A lot of people just spray and pray their attic ventilation. They maybe just stick with what's legacy. They don't try to optimize. They assume the product's in the best interest. They don't educate themselves. They don't have any experience. They don't ask for help. Or maybe they try to apply something that doesn't work for their particular project. Their architectural style matters. Maybe they have blockages. Maybe they have the wrong ratios. We're going to dive in. So I assume everyone is an engineer of sorts, and that is how we train our inspectors. And the purpose of this video is to help supplement anything that the inspectors don't get a chance to share with you, or you have additional questions and there's not enough time during your inspection. And so with that, engineers ask great questions. They want to know the who, what, where, when, and why. And that's where we thrive so that we can help with the explanation so that we can paint a picture for you. And so on the left side of this backdrop, my highly technical abilities will show our ventilation calculations page, which is a warranty for the manufacturers against any poor workmanship related ventilation details. So what that means is that we have proof down to the square inch that the ventilation system was calculated correctly based on the X ventilation details pre-existing and then after. And that's extremely important because if you go with the wrong manufacturer and you get a shitty product, which they're out there, we use Malarkey and ICO, and knock on something wood here, we don't have we haven't had any issues with either of those manufacturers with their product lifespan. So now, a lot of this detail, again, will come down to a property owner's intentions of how long they plan to keep a relationship with the property, which is just a long-winded explanation for your investment strategy. These homes, these properties, pretty much every property in the world almost these days seems to be owned by an institution. And so if you're just renting, even though you pay in a mortgage and you think you own, you got the title, but you're still paying the bank for the mortgage, then it's in the best interest that your investment helps increase the value to the point where you can get a little money back if it's done correctly with good products, with great workmanship, and knowing that everyone who's behind your investment has your best interest at heart. So you'll see all these different pictures and diagrams on the right side of the screen, and you're like, what the hell is this? You've probably seen a couple of these before. Hopefully you see your house's style in there. And so every different house is going to have a little different approach, and not every house has an attic space. There's clear story flat roofs, there's shed roofs, and so on that will not have vaulted ceilings, cathedral ceilings, that are not going to have a space like an attic necessarily for that air to flow. And so the approach is completely different with that. And we're not going to get a chance to optimize all of these different systems, but I really want to break down the difference in products, the difference in the functionality of the products specifically, so that way you can understand a little more about how you can provide either your clients better information, your if you're a property owner, you can make better decisions on how you want to proceed with your project, and a little bit about our standards on and things that are outside of industry um, norms. So again, experience trumps standards in a lot of things. Um, Flow is no exception to that. So you'll see many of these different roof styles have a ridge. Not all of them do have a ridge. And with that, many of them also have an eave. And so with that, air flows from low to high based on thermodynamics, right? And so then you throw in a little fluid dynamics there with some pressure differentials from the actual product design itself. And you're going to be left with a great flowing system, which is how we came to exist. So funny enough, air literally needs to flow through your attic space. And that was my initial introduction into roofing, was through attics, to help find clients their issues. And before you know it, you find blockages, you find organic growth situations that could have been avoided. You get ice dam situations in different regions. We're here in the Pacific Northwest, about 500 feet in elevation. We don't get anything really for ice and snow that are so catastrophic compared to the Cascade Range over in the high desert in Bend. Completely different story there. So, side note: ice and water's code there a little different than the ice and water details here in the Willamette Valley. So, to that, your intake and your exhaust are going to be a balanced equation. So manufacturers say 50-50 with a 60-40 tolerance. What's that mean is that you want to have, and we trend towards the 60-40, that you want a little more intake than you want exhaust to help keep that air flow. You don't want any resistance for that hot air to leave, or moisture in the wintertime. So ventilation, in short, is important in the wintertime for humidity factors, so that way it doesn't condensate on a cool surface and create organic growth situations. And then in the summertime, it's a temperature situation that you want to reduce the temperature to increase the lifespan of the product, the efficiency of the home, and the overall was it efficiency, lifespan, I guess comfort plays a factor into it. There's going to be people watching this that may be like, oh, yeah, our upstairs is unbearable. We've had you clients before. We understand what you're going through. It sucks. But there's a fix to it, right? And so just throwing on extra penetrations, though, is not the answer. You need to know why and what and how it's going to be installed, so that way you understand the functional benefits. So that way you can be one of the clients that says, oh, God, it's a relief. The upstairs is finally livable. So intake and exhaust balance equation, and your exhaust is going to come in two different flavors: active and passive. Your active install mechanisms are going to be your solar powered fans, your gable fans. Your passive is going to be your box vents, your ridge vent, etc. So not to confuse box vents with flapper vents. Your flapper vents are going to be for your shower fans, possibly dryer ducts, hopefully not. Whereas your box vent is strictly for, or should be for, uh, exhausting hot air. So that being said, if you're in a home maybe built after the 80s, we've seen this pretty frequently. Builders, unfortunately, will just zip tie your dryer vent up to the truss nearest to the box vent, and then they hope to God, they're crossing their fingers that that's going to exhaust out properly. And then you're left with a couple sheets of plywood, maybe because it's missing that hole. It's not a closed system. And so then you want to have those dryer vents or your fan vents zip tied and or aluminum taped to those flappers to create a proper closed system. So you're not left with these situations that can be completely avoidable. And that's something you see in that lower right picture. In there is a shower. It's got a hole in the light. Funny enough, they don't have a fan. Everything there could be solved if they would have just had a fan. But they're showing that moisture coming through and then condensating on the roof surface, creating that organic growth situation. Completely avoidable. Okay, so just doing it right the first time. Builders, though, they don't necessarily have to do flapper vents, aren't code. So we've seen projects where we got accordion piping just laying on the attic insulation inside, and it's black as Pirates of the Caribbean sails on the Pearl. And terrible reference, but it ain't good. Okay. And so that being said, there's always a solution in building, and generally you get a plethora of different approaches, which is why we're trying to standardize the approach to make it simple enough. And I know that I'm starting to ramble a little bit, but um, there's so much to cover, you guys. So we did passive, we did active ventilation detail. Next, you're going to be looking at your intake accessories versus your exhaust accessories. And we're going to start at intake. So your intakes, depending on your soffit, whether or not the soffit is open or closed. And if you have a closed soffit, which you can barely see up in the top middle gray picture, they have soffit board that closes that so you can't see down and through the siding. And so there you have bird blocking or baffling of sorts that allows that air to go up and through the attic space. And we're going to get a little more into depth about knee walls and different architectural approaches after we touch on accessories, because we run into this all too often in Portland, that you all want to have your finished attic space. You all want to have that fancy office upstairs or the playroom, and understandable. It's extra space. It's completely buildable and livable, although you want to make sure that you're not scorching yourself unnecessarily if you don't have proper airflow. So if you have a closed soffit situation, which you find very often in these pre-60s homes of Portland, and you have a knee wall situation, then we're going to talk about that approach later. So your intake is going to be that soffit intake, which you can retrofit and you can increase the size of, and then you have to go in and you have to adjust the ventilation detail. You might have to add some interior baffling as well to help that air to channel up to the ridge properly. But it's not 100% necessary. Now, the alternative these days is a smart intake or a shingle over intake, which allows the air to come up and in and over the insulation. If you're looking at this picture with a shower again, that allows the cool air to come up and in over that insulation without having any sort of blockage. And so if you have a proper inspection, then this would be identified that a soffit intake retrofit, which we don't do here at Flow, to be clear, is something that you would want to increase. So if you're just looking at a ventilation optimization project versus a full replacement, then we would go inside the attic, take a look either way to make sure that what's going to be added is going to be functional. So that way you know what you're getting paid for. So that way you can sit cool in the summertime with nice AC sipping on your Arnold Palmers. So your shingle over intake is going to be installed on a 9 NFA per foot measurement unit. And so that's going to be the Air Vent 2 product. We haven't found anything better for that. And you see that little Omni Ridge Pro green bubble there. That's for your exhaust. We'll get there in a second. But your intake should not be a corrugated or unreinforced plastic intake. And you'll find that, and we found that in intakes that don't use a rigid plastic exoskeleton of sorts for structural support, something you can almost even stand on the roof without it bowing or falling down or collapsing over time. Furthermore, like less organic growth, less moss growth, right? No blockage over time. I can have to do as much maintenance on that as well. So you get what you pay for. And you guys are like, oh, well, we found someone to do it for $1,000 and it didn't do anything. Funny enough, they could have easily threw a couple $100 of the cheapest products on your roof and found, well, I did exactly what Flo told me to, but I wanted to save money because I used cheap products. And now I've got a customer who's upset at me because I went cheap on the product. So you got to put in ventilation, you have to go big or go home. And we'll talk more about that Omni Ridge Pro and why we stand by that so much, and the Air Vent 2 shingle over intake. These products are just second to none in the quality itself. And having seen it with my own eyes, having searched for the best product over the years, find that the Lomenco and the shingle vent to intake only, not the exhaust, are what's best on a home. And so um, you might be of a flavor that prefers gaff products, God forbid, certain Teed and or Owens Corning. These products, these manufacturers actually subcontract their ventilation detail to manufacturers to provide a product that they can create a whole system around, which is reasonable enough. They want to sell more warranties, they want to sell more product with their names on it. Hey, you mind selling us some Ridge Vent? Put our name on the box, and that's what you get. So you get those full systems, and then you're kind of stuck with their best uh, idea of the approach. Now, on Malarkey and ICO's side, this wasn't an intended benefit, but neither of those manufacturers have a complete ventilation system, and they defer to industry UL testing standards as being acceptable products and following the product installation guidelines, not just manufacturer's guidelines, to making sure that the system works as a whole, which then benefits an already amazing product like Malarkey and ICO Dynasty. So with that, you've got your shingle over intake, which you add at a 2-to-1 ratio versus your exhaust. And talking about ratios after this, we'll get through accessories. We'll talk about home approaches, and then we'll break down the math a little bit. If you're still around, this could go over 20 minutes now. I haven't even had a coffee and we're rambling, but wanted to get in the shop before everyone shows up for the day, and that's what you get. So your exhaust is, again, passive or active. We offer what we call quiet cool for any active solutions. It's something that's pretty neat. You can actually control it from your phone. You can control it. It's a built-in humidistat. It turns on. It's solar powered. You don't need a wire. You don't need an electrician. You pop it, you drop it, you cool, you flow. And at that point, then you have your passive systems, which are going to be your box fence in a bunch of different sizes for different applications. Important to note. We'll go over a couple of these different roof styles and why those bigger box vents are more important for those projects versus the others. And then you have your ridge vent, which is our old faithful. Now, again, not all ridge vents are created equal, and we're going to go through our box vents first real quick. They come in 38s to 60 NFA, NFA standing for net free area. That's the unit of measure for the amount of air that can flow through those penetrations at any given time. Then you have your ridge vent. And I know we kind of glossed over the box vents, but they're kind of an arcane, prehistoric, they actually choke your roof. So if you can imagine, you have a 50-foot ridge on your home and you have 5 box vents. In between those box vents is 5 or 12 feet. You have 5 to 12 feet, generally closer to 10. But those spaces between the boxes are going to be what's called hot pockets. And the boxes themselves do not have the design benefit of promoting airflow. They are simply protecting weather from getting in and acting as a penetration for air to escape. The difference between letting air escape and optimizing for promoting airflow is in the product design. And so a box with a hole in it, yes, it lets air escape. But is it almost promoting airflow through some nice little fluid dynamic situation? No, it's not. So boxes can go to hell. So we have to deal with boxes only when there's not enough ridge. Otherwise, we're going to be always installing our ridge vent system as much as possible for folks that know the ROI of a well-performing system. So, if you're protecting your family and you go to Les Schwab, you don't go for the cheapest tire. You want a mid-grade tire. You want the thing to stick if you got a break. If you go around a turn too quick, you want to make sure that it's going to grip the ground. So you don't go with the cheapest tires, which are in some, I don't know, I'm not a tire engineer, but I think, like a hard rubber tire might last longer. It could be cheaper. The plasticizers and the rubber itself is either recycled. I have no idea. So we'll go over a lot more product itself in different videos for roofing specifically. But to stay on track with ventilation detail, your ridge vent. It, in most cases, almost every other manufacturer is going to be providing a 10-inch ridge vent, which is the minimum. And I've seen eights in some cases, and I scratch my head to that. But um, do not get any sort of rolling foam style product. If it's not hard plastic, run the other direction. Ask your contractor, what the fuck are you doing putting that on my house? Excuse my French. You need to have a snow load rated hardened plastic ridge vent with a baffle. Okay. The baffle is specifically a little wing that we don't actually have a diagram for here on this page, but imagine this little wing pointing back down the roof, okay? And you have wind going up the roof. Behind the wing is a negative pressure situation. And this is the exact same equation that Bernoulli explains on why planes lift. Okay. So as it flows over your ridge on the back side of the wing, and it has two of these on each side of the ridge, I'm just pointing at one side of the ridge. As it's flowing over, it creates the negative pressure that then pulls air out of the attic space. Okay, cool. Basic principles. The ridge vent is twice as efficient as your intake because it has to accommodate two different sides of the roof worth of intake and airflow and its exit. Okay. And so I don't have an exact explanation for whether or not the south or the east or the west is going to have more air coming out of it or not. All I know is that a Lomenco ridge vent will spank the pants off of any other ridge vent out there. I've seen it clear a smokehouse twice as fast. And that's all we stand by. Further, I told you about the 8 and the 10-inch variables on the hip and ridge. If you want the most protection, you want the widest hip and ridge shingle possible. Not just reinforced, not just hail resistant, not double laminate, not fancy, extravagant designer hip and ridge. You want the widest, okay? And on your ridge, when you have a rip of 3 inches or more on your top of your roof, you want the most protection possible. So we use a 12-inch ridge vent by Lomenco, and that requires a 12-inch hip and ridge cap shingle. It creates a nightmare for our suppliers. Like, God damn, you keep ordering all this 12-inch hip and ridge. We want the protection for you guys so we can sleep sound, so you guys can sleep sound, so you guys get the best ROI on the investment, okay? So we've gone over accessories now. We got to go over a little bit of house design. I told you we're going to break down a little bit of the numbers. This just keeps on going. I told you 10 minutes. I do apologize. If you're still watching this, congratulations. We're learning together. We're flowing, and so we're growing. Okay? So your open gable style roof is going to be one of the most simple roofs, classic roofs that you'll find. The ranch style roof. Okay? So you got your low eaves, you got your upper ridge. The quantity of intake versus exhaust is not going to be a factor of how high your attic space is. That will be a factor of where you place those components on the intake side. It's going to be a formula of attic space as a ratio to how much ventilation you need. Okay, so 1 to 300, which is a standard for code in the US. We again trend towards the international standard, which is twice as much, which is 1 to 150. And because that ratio is half, that means you can fit twice as much in that 1 to 300 ratio, if that makes sense for you. So the 1 to 300 simply states, to make the numbers easy, if you have 1,500 square foot attic space in any of these different spaces here, you would need 5 square feet of NFA. Okay, so 1,500 divided by 300 is 5. Pretty simple math, right? And then you have to balance that. So if you have 5 square feet of exhaust, how much intake are you going to need? Twice as much. So you're going to need 10 square feet of NFA for intake, okay? And you're like, oh, well, I've got a pre-1960s home. I don't have any intake. Congratulations. The math is really simple. You just add that to your attic space, either retrofitting through your soffit or through smart shingle intake, and you have a balanced system. Now, the nuances of where to install that is going to be based on the experience of the company that you're choosing. You can install the right amount of ventilation detail in the wrong place and be left with a seriously bad result. And so where you put your ventilation detail is going to matter. So simply enough, on the simplest roof, the open gable, you rip your ridge minus the 2 feet on either side for wind driven rain considerations, and you're left with, let's say, 46 feet of ridge on our 50-foot example. Then you would need 92 feet of intake total. And then you split that on either side of the roof if it doesn't have any pre-existing legacy intake, is what we call it. So that being said, there becomes a lot of considerations with this ridge vent situation. Now, you could do the same thing if there was vaulted ceilings on that gable roof with boxes, but the correct way to do that is by creating lateral airflow. And you're going to see that in that skylight bottom right picture there. In order to get the airflow up and around penetrations or cathedral ceilings to allow lateral airflow, you need to notch those trusses to let things go left or right. And if you have so in cathedral ceilings with a gable situation, you would not want to use boxes. If you had to and you weren't like, I don't want to pay extra for the ridge, you would need to create that lateral airflow, which means you need to open up a little bit of plywood and notch those trusses a little bit so you can create that lateral movement. If you have the ridge, though, in a cathedral, or I like to call them vaulted ceilings, what I grew up with, vaulted ceilings, then you're going to have a continuous exit, which means that you're not going to need a notch, right? And that's the benefit of the ridge, is that it's a continuous exit for all those different compartments between the trusses for air to flow. So, and that in those cathedral and vaulted ceilings, you're kind of hoping that your builder actually left the 1 to 2 inches required over the insulations for that air to flow underneath the decking. We've seen these cathedral vaulted ceiling situations be completely blocked, and there's not much we can do other than tell the customer that there's the right way to do it, that there's the wrong way to do it, and the right way to do it's a lot more expensive. So regarding involving plywood. So what else? Ridge vent intakes. Okay, so we're still on the roof shapes here. Not all homes are going to get a perfect 50-50 ratio or a perfect 60-40 ratio based on the amount of eaves that they have compared to the amount of ridge they have. So that brings up a good point. So we get a lot of these full hip situations where gutters will wrap all the way around your house. Maybe you have that, maybe you don't. So if you have a reduced amount of ridge, then we defer to the numbers of our equations to allow us to decide what is in the best benefit of the client and the manufacturer in this case, to make sure that you're protected with math. Okay. And so what that means is that if you have a 18 NFA product, again, to keep the math simple, and you have 10 feet of ridge, you have 180 feet. 18 times 10 is 180 NFA exhaust. Okay. And if we're at a 50-50 ratio, ideally in the manufacturer's eyes, then you would need to, in this case for the full hip, we're just going straight down. So we talked about the open gable, now we're going down to the hip roof. If you have a reduced amount of ridge, then you need to get your NFA up to the point where you can actually meet the 50-50 demands of the amount of attic space that you have. And so the math is super simple because the industry understands that we're full of roofers that may not even graduated high school that don't know a lick about plus minus dividing or multiplying. And at that point, you need to be able to balance those systems with a reduced amount of ridge. So if you had, again, the intake is 9 NFA, the exhaust is 18 NFA. You have 10 feet of ridge on this hip example. You're going to have 180 NFA. If you have twice of that of your intake, then you're going to have 20 feet of intake. 20 times 9 is 180 NFA. So you can see how, again, those are balanced. But 20 feet of intake on an entire smart shingle over intake is not enough. They come in 4-foot sticks. They're going to be 5 pieces, not only going to have an odd piece sticking out somewhere, but it's just not enough. You're going to tell me you're going to disperse 20 feet of intake across a roof that could be, 50 by 30 is not going to work. Okay. And so, um, how do you get your NFA up on the exhaust end? This is where we got to go back to the boxes. Okay. So if you have 10 boxes, though, at 38 NFA to 49 plus NFA, to keep the math simple, 380 NFA exhaust versus the 180 on the ridge. So there's always going to be, and we find that the ROI of the ridge starts at about 20 feet of ridge when there's functional and clear attic space involved. Otherwise, boxes are going to be a preferred component when the roof is what we call too broken up, in some cases where there's not enough ridge, or in some cases, well, when you have variable height ridges. Okay, so short circuiting is a real concern of ours, to make sure that these products are functioning correctly, not your exhaust is not acting as intake. All right, so again, the nuance of how you install these components is going to come down to the experience of the installer. Here at Flow, we install ventilation systems every day, whether it be a retrofit or a full replacement. These ventilation plans are specific for your project to make sure that it's functional and flowing, so you're not breathing organic growth situations like Oregon State's got in their housing. Not supposed to know about that. Or any of these other single family situations. So we're breaking it down here. We kind of got closer to a little bit closer to these, we call these the Cape Cod homes here in Portland, with the fancy finished attic knee wall detail. How do I ventilate my attic space for my playroom, for my office space upstairs? And by the way, houses 1940s or older, help, because it's hot. Okay, so off to the right of my picture, just right here, this image is showing that style, and it's showing a successful ventilation plan on that Cape Cod design. Okay, versus what we find all too often, almost every time in Portland, we check it either way, regardless, to be sure that the ventilation over the finished space, the insulation over the finished space is choking that air from flowing at all. And so it's a nightmare. Property owners don't want to deal with it. They don't want to gut it. They don't want to redo it. They don't want to resheet it. It's expensive. They say, what can you do? So at that point, we have to optimize that particular project in its own exclusive manner, which means that we create the ventilation plan. And unfortunately, you're going to have a broken up, messy looking roof in order to compartmentalize all those different little storage areas and nooks and crannies to ventilate independently from the upper attic space, which is that last little triangle where things are actually flowing out. So that gets to be messy. We do those pretty frequently. They require a little more time and attention. Homeowners generally got a lot more questions around those types of projects, which is understandable. But you gotta make it functional, right? And so here in Oregon, 6 months of the year, it's all southern exposure, right? And so the south end should be balancing the north end if the house is east to west, but the overall ratios might fluctuate depending on whether that section, maybe that finished attic space or that storage area, is facing the south or not. So, and then you throw in gables there, right, in your knee wall, and you got completely shut off airflow in some situations. And so, what you're supposed to do is that great picture up above is add that baffling to push down the insulation so that air can actually flow underneath your decking, your sheathing, your plywood. So that way, air is actually going to escape, and that's going to increase the efficiency of the home. It's going to make your product last longer, going to be a lot more comfortable inside. And that's the gist of how we approach attic ventilation. And so if you're still watching this, I'm impressed. I'm impressed that I can even ramble this long about attic ventilation. There's still so much that we could cover, There's metal details, there's membrane details, there's different architectural approaches. But if you got questions, even if you're a GC, if you're an installer, shoot them out over to us. We can help get them answered as much as we can. If you're a property owner of any sort, then we can try to get you a solution for what your concerns are, answer any questions as much as we possibly can, best we possibly can. And yeah, we appreciate you guys again, your time and attention. Hope you're all growing, and we're going to keep on flowing. Cheesy. So thanks again. Take care, and we will catch you on the next one.